Hi, everybody. Hello. Thanks so much for coming out tonight and coming out after we're closed, which is kind of fun. We were going to leave this door open just because it helps with a little airflow and everything. Is that cool? We feel okay with that. And also feels then we feel less trapped, in this room with no doors. And I think we'll have these folks come on in and then we'll get started. Oh, I should take a minute to say we have assistive listening technology, little devices they look like sort of over the ear headphones. So if that's something that you need, we have them at this blue tablecloth over here. If you need that, just feel free to grab one, or you can raise your hand and I can grab it for you if you prefer. Well, I'll just hang out. And now I'm going to check with our wonderful technician in the booth, Lisa. Are we recording? Fantastic. I get the thumbs up. Okay, so we're going to get started. Good evening. I'm Stesha Brandon, the Literature and Humanities Program Manager here at the Seattle Public Library. As we begin tonight, I want to just take a minute to acknowledge that we're on Indigenous land. Here in Seattle, these are the traditional unceded territories of Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. We honor their elders past, present, and future, and we thank them for their stewardship of the land. Welcome to tonight's program with Dr. Karen Tang and Jane Park. Thanks to our partners at Elliott Bay Book Company and Model Minority Moms podcast. We're grateful as well to our series sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation, and to the Seattle Times for their generous support of library programs. Thank you as well to the Seattle Public Library Foundation. Generous gifts from thousands of donors help the library provide free programs and services that touch the lives of everyone in our community. I have a few announcements before we get started. Our friends from Elliott Bay Book Company are selling copies of Dr. Tang's book at their table to your right. There's John, and he's got the book with the vagina on the cover for you. Yes, sorry to make you blush, John. And if you need to exit the auditorium during the event, you can exit through the door to your right, which leads into the kids section, and there's some bathrooms over there, or you can exit through this door if you need to exit this way. There's also bathrooms on the other side of the auditorium this way. And as I mentioned, we have assistive listening devices for you if that's something that would be helpful. Now I am delighted to introduce tonight's speakers. Dr. Karen Tang is a board-certified gynecologist and minimally invasive gynecologic surgeon who is an internationally recognized leader in reproductive health. She received her medical degree and master's in public health at Columbia University and trained in obstetrics and gynecology at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, Harvard Medical School. As at Karen Tang MD on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, she reaches millions of viewers each month with her educational videos about period health, pelvic pain, and reproductive rights. Dr. Tang has been featured in the Washington Post, Self Magazine, Glamour, NBC.com, and NPR, among others. And she lives in Philadelphia, in the area of Philadelphia, with her husband and 3 kids. She's going to talk tonight with Jane Park, a former newscaster, TikTok sensation, and Seattle mom of 2. And you can find Jane at Jane Park Kang, or at Jane Park Ang, I think, on Instagram and TikTok, where she has more than 3 million followers. So please help me welcome tonight's speakers.
I see a lot of familiar faces, and I'm so excited that they all came to see you, Karen.
I'm sure some of them came to see you too. I see way more followers than I do.
Well, so we have to talk about how we first met, right? Met online.
So in one of those kind of as a small world things, we knew each other from social media. Like I obviously loved the post you made about parenthood and the pandemic. And we discovered along the way that we actually had a common, connection. My sister was her friend
from Michigan. Like they were
Yeah.
friends from church and they knew each other. So we discovered that, I think after we were already social media friends, like, oh my God.
Yes. Your sister Jen messaged me and said, hey, by the way, my sister is a doctor and she's just getting started on social media and just wanted to like let you know so you could check it out. And I said, wait, is your sister Dr. Karen Tang? I hadn't made the connection, I think, and then it all made sense. So this is awesome that we get to finally meet in person. It took 4 years, right?
And before we start the event, I wanted to also especially thank the Seattle Public Library. When the book first came out in May, I don't know if any of you are authors, you know anything about publishing. Authors don't get too much information about what's happening with their book. Like I had no idea how many copies of the book were out there, what bookstores or libraries it was at. So being a doctor who just like really likes data, I was like, I just need to figure out where is my book. So I, like a crazy person, went to library catalogs, you know, for Boston, LA, Dallas. Like I was like, let me just see if it's there.
Mm-hmm.
My eyeballs nearly popped out of my head when I saw Seattle's because it was named like a peak pick. There was like 180 copies of it. And so, you know, when I met Sasha, I was just saying, you know, how much I appreciated that a library system would, one, pick a book on women's health, on reproductive health, say that this is something worth getting out en masse to their readers, to educate people that it was important, that it was valuable, and that this is something that they wanted everyone to have access to without waiting. And I thought that was absolutely amazing. So even before there was even a dream of having an event, I was like, if I ever come to the city of Seattle, I'm gonna come right to this library and thank the bookseller, or the librarians, because it was so powerful to me to know that there was that sort of support. And, you know, because it's not necessarily true, you know, there's millions of books every year, they're picking from incredible books, like it's very hard for them to select just a few. So I was so moved. I can't tell you, I literally was like, public library, thank you. So thank you to, if there are any other librarians here, I can't say thank you enough.
Yeah, and when you mentioned that to me, I was like, okay, we need to make a Seattle event happen. I'm so honored that you asked me to join you. We were talking about some local bookstores, where we could host this event, and then I think this was the perfect venue. So let's dive right in. So this is your first book. It's not Hysteria, and the subtitle is Everything You Need to Know About Your Reproductive Health, parentheses, but were never told. I think that's the perfect title. Did you know that this was going to be the title?
No, I'll tell you, it originally had a much more boring, the cover and the title changed a lot, actually. So it started out with a very boring title. It was like periods, pain, empowerment. I like the alliteration of it. And then just the whole team kind of was, you know, they were throwing out different ideas for titles. And then one of the literary agents was like, it's not Hysteria. I'm like, amazing, because it captures so much. It basically, you know, the experience of women throughout all of human history, being told that things were in their heads, normalization of pain, you know, basically kind of being dismissed. But to say it's not hysteria, like these are actual medical issues, like there are some facts and there are some serious answers that we can give you, and you don't have to just sort of deal with everything. And then the subtitle, the publisher came up with. So everything you need to know about your reproductive health but were never told. So, you know, it's not just here's an encyclopedia, but acknowledging the fact that there are these gaps in what people, you know, the information that they're given, you know, when you go to school, how little we're being told, you know, what little information you're getting from the medical profession. So it captures a whole lot. And then the cover.
Yes, I love the cover.
I call it Vulva Flame, or like, we went through many different iterations of the cover before we landed on this. You know, some of them had like a uterus made of flowers. It was really cool. But when they came up with this one, we were like, that's the one. And the publisher didn't say what they think it means. I have my own interpretation. But I think because it could be fire, it could be a flame. You know, fire, it can burn, it can be painful, but it's also illuminating. You know, it can spark a wildfire, you know, it can spark change. So, you know, you can kind of put your own interpretation on it, but that's sort of what I think about it.
I feel like you need this on a large canvas in your practice, in your office.
Yes, definitely on the wall. I was joking we would make merch. We would have like vulva merch.
Yeah. Well, your publisher sent me this hardcover, and I blushed when I opened the box because it was all kinds of reproductive female organs, right? Stickers, like water bottle stickers, and it was like a sample of lube, and I was like, Karen.
we had an influencer box. Those of you who do like book talk, book, Bookstagram, whatever, you always see influencers opening their box. And we were like, what could be fun to put in the influencer box? So we had Uber Lube. So they had like these beautiful giant glass bottles of lube, and then also I forget what it's called, like I Heart Guts, and they're like cartoon uteruses and ovaries, with like little puns about anyway, it was very funny. So all these like pins and like stickers. And stuff.
Yeah, little keychains, bag charms. It was amazing.
Yeah.
It made me reflect on my own internalized kind of not wanting to talk about all of this, right?
Yeah. Why do you have that initial reaction? Like, shoot, it's
right.
embarrassing, but is it? Like,
yeah. And you're trying to really break through that. I want to talk about your dedication, because right away that was like, whoa, a punch in the gut. So what do you know by heart, your dedication?
Of course, yeah. So have you guys seen it, the dedication? It's like this. So it's to everyone whose health is suffered because of the patriarchy. It's you are seen, you are believed, and you deserve change. And so originally, the original version of the dedication said the fucking patriarchy. And so like your health is suffered because of the fucking patriarchy. And my editor, she's very she's a young woman, but she was very kind of serious. And she's like, you gotta take the swear word out. And I was like, can I just do F dash dash dash? Or can I do exclamation point, asterisk, she's like, no, just take it all out. And so what I've done is when I do book signings or when I go to bookstores and I sign stuff, I'll actually ask the bookseller or I ask the person, do you mind if I put a little carrot and put the fucking in? So if you want me to sign it that way, I'll put it in there. I can customize it. I recently went to a whole bunch of bookstores in all sorts of places. I was in England and it was all over London, and in Europe they were like, yeah, we're not Puritans, they were just like put the swear word in there. So yeah, I guess I think it captures a lot. It's not just your health has suffered a little bit. Your health has suffered a lot, and it's not just one person. It's not just 10 people. It's billions of people throughout history. It's because of the patriarchy. And the term the patriarchy kind of has become almost like a joke, but in this case, it's true. It's sort of a systemic approach to, looking at women's bodies, looking at female bodies, normalizing pain, dismissing it as real medicine. All of that has kind of led to people's experiences and how difficult it is to get good care. So, one of the first chapters is about history. I like history a lot. I think it's important to understand context. And so I say right in the beginning of the book, it's not an encyclopedia. It has chapters on each of these topics, but it's also acknowledging that this is people's experience. It's not just some dry facts about fibroids, endo, but it's about race. It's about misogyny. It's about all of these things that kind of contributed to people's what they're going through.
Right.
So I wanted to kind of put it into context and explain all that.
Yeah, I was reading it and I was telling Jen, your sister, that I was surprised how textbook-like it reads, but I could understand everything. And it was like, wow, she's trusting the reader with all of this information. I'm not, in medical training. I have no desire to be an expert, but it's making me very aware of my body and what I have gone through, and normalizing everything. So it's really a comprehensive guide. You cover everything from fibroids to PCOS to periods, PMDD, and I think also the age range, right? It could be for teenagers or adolescents, starting kind of on this women's health journey, and then all the way to postmenopause, right?
And that was the goal, was to have it be, no matter where you are in your reproductive life, whether you're a teenager, like you said, just starting to figure things out in terms of periods and sexuality, and all the way through someone who is, very far post-menopause. One of my recent events, a friend of mine brought her 89-year-old mother, and she texted me after, she's like, oh my God, my mom said, I wish I'd had this when I was young. It would have saved me so much suffering. I would have understood my body. And so I wanted to be something that people could use no matter how old they are, what they were going through, and be able to kind of come back to it throughout their life when you're young, you're wanting to prevent pregnancy. If you are trying to get pregnant and you're having, issues getting pregnant or having miscarriages, if you're postmenopausal, perimenopausal, we'll talk about that. It's a huge topic right now. That you could find something relevant to you. Because basically all of us have had some problem. Like there's nobody who has zero issues with their vagina, their bladder, their, periods, fertility, hormones. Like we're all having some issue. So just to have it be, no matter where you are, that you could kind of come to it and find some sort of answer. And I tell people it's also not like a novel where you read from cover to cover. Like you'll skip around. Like you'll pick, you're like, maybe I want to learn about PCOS or endometriosis, or birth control or abortion. And just kind of like, you could read it cover to cover, but you could also kind of skip.
Well, I love that you you specify that you give permission to just read the parts that pertain to you, or just have it on hand. It's 2024, but why is it so hard for us to get answers, clear answers, or even feel empowered when we're sitting in the doctor's office at the OBGYN to ask these questions and question whether it's not normal,
I mean, there's so many layers to this. So I tell people, the first thing is when you said, like, I had to question my own discomfort about this. From the time we are kids, we are told, don't talk about this. It's embarrassing. Like, you don't, talk about your private area. You don't talk about sex. And especially in other parts of the country, like Seattle's pretty liberal, but other parts of the country where it's just like even saying sex, like you get, they like censored or whatever. A friend of mine who's a nurse said that her daughter was like in preschool and she got called to the principal's office, like your daughter did something really, you should know about this. She said the word vagina. Like it was like she had sworn. It's like some swear words like fathers, like there's just like, but that's a part of her body. Like she should say the word vagina. But just like it's conditioned in us, like it's unspeakable, like especially women's health. Like for some reason, like women's health, like it's unspeakable. Don't say the word vagina, and then people kind of internalize that. They're embarrassed to ask about, I'm having bladder issues, I'm having vaginal problems, I'm having orgasm issues. Like when I was writing the book, I wrote a letter to booksellers and librarians to say that I guarantee, like all of the female people in your bookstore, your library, have some problem, but they're going to feel so uncomfortable saying, well, do you have a book about bladder health? Like, do you have a book about like vaginal problems? So part of that is the problem, is just sort of that sense of discomfort. And then the other is that has then led to some of the issues of like not enough research. So women's health is not considered like real medicine. So there's so many research studies and funding and awareness about cancer, which obviously there should be, but just to say cancer is real medicine, strokes and heart attacks are real medicine, diabetes is real medicine, but period problems is lady stuff, menopause is lady stuff. We don't speak of it, we don't dedicate research funding to it, so then we don't have answers. So in one of the first chapters, it was saying, it's all sort of snowball effect. Our cultural perceptions of the value of women's health, is it real, is it important? Then leads to there's not enough information, so then it seems really mysterious. So then when somebody comes in and they're like listing off a whole bunch of symptoms, the doctor's gonna be like, well, you're just anxious because clearly nothing can explain your 20 different symptoms. But in reality, it's endometriosis, it's PCOS, it's PMDD, it's perimenopause. They're common things. And then in the chapters, I felt really bad because every single chapter I would be like, we don't know what causes PCOS. We don't know what causes endometriosis. It's a mystery because there's not enough research about it. So then, the other problem is the system, that women's health is not valued. So insurance reimbursement for women's health is a fraction of what it is for urology, orthopedic surgery, real things, real surgery, real medicine. So then the OBGYNs are seeing 40, 50 patients, like their labor and deliveries are closing because they're losing money. And so then there's, when you go to your doctor's appointment, I don't know how it is in Seattle, out where we are, people are waiting like months for an OBGYN appointment. They get 15 minutes with the doctor when they're finally there. The doctor has 5 patients waiting. They're trying to chart and all this stuff, and you're like, I need to ask all my questions. And there's just not enough time. So it's all of these things together are contributing to this big crisis. And the system is sort of designed to fail.
It really is a snowball effect, right? Because then I'm like, I'm embarrassed to ask this because I feel like I should know this, but I don't, and maybe this is not the appropriate place to really go back to the basics. But you're so compassionate about that. You write in the book that you actually draw the anatomy for anyone and everyone, and you don't assume that they have any kind of baseline knowledge. And I think that's wonderful and really inclusive and non-judgmental.
I try and treat everyone the same. So I say in the book, it's like, if you are a doctor yourself, if you are a high school student, I'm going to kind of explain things, the same content, maybe like changing like the language or the degree of like kind of, like I might mention more studies or something like that. But I'm going to give everyone the same basic information because you all deserve the information in the way that makes sense to you. So I was joking, but it's true. It's like, if I were to go see an ophthalmologist and have surgery on my retina, I want them to explain to me, like, I'm a doctor, but I'm like, please explain to me the anatomy of the eyeball because I want to know. So a lot of times, you may get like a prescription for something. You may get like, an imaging study order, but you kind of leave the office being like, well, I still kind of don't fully understand what's going on. So it's not just a matter of like getting a prescription, getting something, but it's also empowering you to understand your body, what's going on. In an ideal situation, like you would leave those appointments with as much information as the doctor has. Okay, so like I understand my options, what I think's going on, what the risks, benefits, the alternatives, and then I kind of came to a good choice for myself. And that's the ideal situation.
Yes.
So.
And I love that in each chapter of the book, it's very clearly structured. And then you have, in conclusion, takeaways. And then you also have sample questions that you can ask a provider. And I think that makes it so easy to use and actually practical. And what was your intention with that?
So again, we didn't want it to be just like an encyclopedia. It is important to give the information, but I also wanted to be like, take it from just the page to your life. So again, everyone's an individual, everyone's going through a different thing, and everyone has a different perspective on treatment. So I wanted it to be where you could also not just get information as dry facts, but also to make it useful for yourself. So there's a chapter in the beginning that's just sort of taking stock of you, like just take notes, like what's going on with your period, what's going on with symptoms. Reflect on things like, your thoughts on fertility, your thoughts on medications and hormones, your thoughts on surgery, because that actually will make your appointments with your doctor a little bit more effective. You're kind of hitting the ground running. So rather than being like, a lot of times when people go to doctors like kind of trying to spend time like pulling the information out of you, like tell me about all your periods and explain like all this stuff. And then, when they're explaining the treatment options, like it's going by so fast, you're like, wait, like, tell me that one more time. Just understanding, when you go to the office, okay, I'm having these issues with my periods. I think, I've read enough. I think I have enough symptoms of PCOS. I'm a little bit curious about that. Can you tell me about PCOS? I have these thoughts on hormones. I'm not interested in medications, but I'd like to learn about more of like a holistic approach. I might have endometriosis. I'm really, looking for a surgical answer, so it at least kind of like gives you that head start about understanding your body and understanding your options. So like I said, it kind of makes your, sitting down with your doctor a little bit more effective. And then also at the end, it, has, like questions to ask your doctor, clarifications, where might people be confused. There's a chapter at the end about GYN exams. And there's a big topic now, which is like pain with IUD insertions, pain with GYN procedures. What are your options for pain management for IUD insertions? So again, just kind of giving a little bit of that like practical information so that you can then go to your appointment and have a better sense of what you can choose.
Yeah. I mean, I was curious, have you always been this type of provider or what was that trajectory for you?
Yes. Well, so it's interesting. I thought you were going to ask, like, have you always been this open about, whatever.
That too. Yeah.
Because now, I'm on TikTok, I'm talking about like vaginas and joking and stuff like that. But, I love, the Model Minority Moms, like I was on their podcast and they actually asked a similar question. And no, I mean, like when my parents did not talk about sex, we didn't talk about periods or anything.
Same, not at all.
Very, very like, just like don't have sex and then, just somehow you'll magically get
don't ask questions.
Don't ask. And so I think, when I knew I wanted to be a doctor and then I was, thinking I'm pretty sure I want to do OBGYN and women's health, just seeing how great it was to be open and to discuss things and to have permission to normalize all this stuff. It really impacted me. I'm like, it's much better to be like, everyone is a sexual being. Well, not everyone, but like, most people are going to be sexually active. They're going to have questions. They're having problems with these things. It's normal. And, we should be able to talk about it. And the social media thing, it was a total accident. I didn't do any social media before 2018. I don't know when you started with everything.
Probably, I mean, yeah, pandemic. Yeah.
Exactly. So it was right before pandemic. I didn't do Twitter, Instagram. I didn't take selfies. I hated being on camera. But I loved teaching. So I've always enjoyed in, medical school training. I loved like breaking things down, explaining them in an easy way. And then, it was very gratifying to, help people understand stuff. So, I started in social media just to kind of let people know I existed as a doctor.
Yeah.
Like, I'm here. If you need a doctor, come see me. And then the pandemic happened. It shut everything down. So I had a lot of time on my hands. And then everybody went onto TikTok because everyone had time on their hands. And, just giving basic information about like, pap smears, birth control, all this stuff, like it kind of blew up because there's such a need for it. And so like I said, I like humor. I like all this stuff. I think it makes it, easier to, to think about these things, which feel a little bit embarrassing to us, to kind of diffuse the situation a little bit. So all of it kind of came together in this kind of crazy way. And then the book is more my natural habitat, so to speak. I've always been more of like a writer, contemplative. It's not in my nature to be like, let me go be crazy on TikTok. So this was a little bit more like coming home to like, let me like write stuff and explain things and all of that. So it was nice to have this as a mode of communication.
Yeah.
In addition to like the funny videos and all that.
And what has that social media journey, how has that impacted the way you practice and you as a clinician now?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I didn't do social media that long ago, and a friend of mine who did a lot of social media was the one who got me to do it. She said, this is where people get their information from.
Yeah.
Like they aren't necessarily sitting in front of their doctor asking a million questions. They're going to go on YouTube and like, Facebook and at the time, like, TikTok. They're going to look for that information. So we as doctors are kind of already behind the 8 ball because we didn't realize that this was happening and that this was how people were communicating. And so I actually now, it's not like an anthropologist, but like it's basically a way to see what people are concerned about. So the perimenopause, menopause thing, the questions about birth control, like there's so much misinformation out there that it is helpful for me to understand what people are hearing, the fears that they have, the fears that people are stoking on purpose to sell their, shitty detoxes and like all that stuff, so that I can then kind of address it in an evidence-based way.
I want to talk about one of your most viral videos. I don't know if many of you have seen it. I'm sure you have. It's been, shared many times, but it's about debunking this idea that chromosomes determine gender.
So this is like maybe like 3 years ago now. So it was like a Marjorie Taylor Greene, like, there's like, you've probably seen it, like, there's male and female, XY, XX, whatever, and that's science. And so, I was so mad, and it was like at the end of a clinic day, and like my hair is all a mess, and I was just like, let me just like rattle this off. I did not think that anyone's going to see it at the time. I didn't have that many followers. But then it went super crazy viral, and everybody saw it, and people were sharing it. But basically it was saying, like for those of us who are actual, like, experts in like gender biology, all this stuff, like we know that gender's not binary, biological sex is not binary. Intersex people exist where it's not, uniformly like genes, chromosomes, organs, genitals, purely male, purely female. This kind of came up again in the Olympics with the boxing controversy, where people were like scrutinizing, does this boxer have XY chromosomes, what genitals do they have? And so just to kind of say that scientists understand the complexity, that we understand that human beings are much more complex than just this, the super basic, like middle school XXXY that people were told. And that language of science has been co-opted to be discriminatory against people who are transgender, gender diverse, queer in general. And so, trying to, bring it back like, hey, actually science supports diversity.
Mhm.
And that's so important. And, we see this now, like not just with gender, but also with reproductive rights, with, like abortion. I think a lot of doctors before a couple of years ago were like, we should keep silent about politics, like we are neutral.
Mhm.
But then politics invaded our lane. And so that's why we have to now be speaking up. I give the example with the gender affirming care and abortion, where the standard medical care has now become illegal because of politicians who have no understanding of the science. Like obviously
Mhm.
you've heard a lot, the woman in Atlanta who passed away because of the abortion laws. The fact that anybody who's not a doctor can make a decision like this for someone who, it's just any other person can invade the exam room and override a doctor's expertise, the person's personal beliefs and their need, for themselves. Nobody would allow that for cancer treatment. Again, back to what's real medicine and what's, like up for grabs. Nobody would say to a cancer doctor, you're not to give, I don't believe in chemotherapy. It's dangerous. It should be outlawed. So I've outlawed it. You can't have it. Or if somebody was a Jehovah's Witness, like a lawmaker, be like, I don't believe in blood transfusions. None of you get blood transfusions. It's illegal. But they have no medical background, et cetera. So, now you see a lot of gynecologists, fertility doctors, especially with the IVF, like endocrinologists, gender affirming care, psychiatrists, like now speaking out more politically because of the importance of showing the support of the medical establishment for some of these issues. That was a very long answer.
No, I mean, well,
very important. Yeah.
Well, that's why it's so important to make all of this information accessible via, your book, your social media platform. Just the more people are informed, the more inclined they will be to pay attention to what their elected officials or people running for office want to do, what kind of policies and laws they want to pass. I also,
I think, just don't understand.
No.
In that confusion, in like the fear mongering,
Mhm.
then people can kind of come in and be like, oh, well, like this is super dangerous. Like, so I think, having facts, having accurate information, explaining all of these things in an easy to understand way is so important. So.
And I also want to acknowledge that you use gender inclusive language continuously through the book, and then you also explain why you do that. Was there anything that any of the parts or any topic where in your research for the book you were surprised by?
There were a lot of things I was surprised by. So the history chapter, again, is kind of explaining like why everything is, the way it is. I knew that there wasn't enough research on women's health, but I didn't realize the point to which women are like actively excluded from research. So again, those of you who read the book, women of reproductive age were actively excluded from like FDA drug trials because of the concern for birth defects for decades. And it wasn't until like 1992, 1994 that they actually changed that. And
That's
that
crazy.
Include women.
Yeah.
So how many medications do they test like only on men? And so we're like, we just don't know like how it impacts women. Same thing for NIH trials. NIH trials did not have to include women until like the same year. It was like 1994. It was like the Clinton administration. So for decades, that groundbreaking, like a lot of them were like, cardiovascular disease, groundbreaking trials, all men. So a lot of times like we learn things like heart attacks present differently in women. The symptoms are very different in women than in men, but we call them the classic heart attack symptoms, even though half the population doesn't have those classic symptoms. And so it's fascinating to say, well, like this is the classic presentation of a heart attack, except that's not how it works with half of the population. That's just what we know from the studies.
Yeah.
So I was like flabbergasted when I learned that. It just seems so outrageous. And so, things like that were mind-boggling.
I mean, if that's the case, then it's no wonder we've seen so much racism in research and treatment, and you speak a lot about that as well.
Yeah, so obviously a lot of us know about things like racial disparities, Black maternal mortality. Something that recently we are starting to learn about are things like the endocrine disruptor potential for things like hair relaxers, so more commonly used in women of color, has increased risk of breast cancer, uterine cancer, fibroids. So this is sort of where maybe like social pressures to have like a certain kind of like standard of beauty is putting biological pressures and actual impacting people's health. So when we say, like race impacts health, like it used to be that we would say, okay, Black women have more risk of this, that, the other. It's not necessarily that you were just like born with a different risk, but so many of these things, like in like unconscious or conscious biases, like some of these other social pressures, like the impact of stress, the impact of like discrimination, like actually manifest as health differences. So now it's so important to kind of like try and tease all that out instead of just saying like, oh, just by nature, Black people are different, and they're like race is another social construct.
Yeah.
So all of these things are actually the reason that there are racial differences.
Are we seeing the tide turn? Are we seeing more research funding and more studies?
Yes. So the reason it's so important to speak out, to have events like this, to talk with each other, is because there's so much power in like speaking out. So with menopause, perimenopause, a lot of you have seen like it's all over the place now, and there's a couple reasons why. One is that powerful women like your Oprahs, your Halle Berrys, or Drew Barrymores are now going through perimenopause, menopause, and they're like, this is F. What in the world? Like, like, did you see like the Oprah interviews and stuff? Where oh my God. So Oprah was like, she had brain fog. She couldn't focus. She gave up the Oprah Book Club for a while because she couldn't read. Like, she was like, I just can't focus on a book when I'm reading. She had palpitations, and she had like $1 million cardiac workup, and it turned out she was having vasomotor symptoms from menopause. And so, she, and like I said, what's her name? Like Naomi Watts, Halle Berry, like literally like took their entire career and they were like, okay, we are focusing on like menopause now. So Halle Berry was like literally like on Capitol Hill, like, lobbying like bipartisan support for funding for like menopause research. It's absolutely incredible. And just getting all that information out to the public. Mary Claire Haber's book on menopause, #1 book on Amazon. Like not just like in a subcategory, it was like the #1 book of all books. #1. It was on the New York Times, I think, bestseller list for like 20 weeks so far. So just showing like the impact of just something like sharing those stories and how widespread they are. I call it the Emperor's New Clothes phenomenon, where it's like everybody was sort of just like, oh God, this is just me. I'm too embarrassed. I just have to deal with it. And then like one person speaks up, and then everyone looks around like, shit, we're all going through this. Like half of the human population is going to go through menopause. And so, once everyone starts kind of speaking up and demanding more answers, then, the funding and then, there's a lot of femtech now, like people are realizing, oh, there's money to be made in helping women come up with different things. And so, like I said, just being able to speak and share stories and advocate, like, has been really powerful. Same thing with like endometriosis. I don't know if anybody knows endometriosis. Endometriosis advocacy groups have been very, very impressive. So they speak out. There was a documentary called Below the Belt. They actually hold screenings at universities. They had a screening for Congress. They had, because it was the two of the producers of Hillary Clinton and Orrin Hatch. Orrin Hatch's granddaughter had endometriosis. So literally like one of these rare situations where this kind of brought people across, the divide or whatever. So they lobbied for more funding. They got additional government funding for endometriosis research because of that. So again, just like a little bit of like people like kind of squeaky wheel, like asking for, demanding more research funding, attention, education, awareness.
That's great. We do want to reserve some time for Q&A from the audience, but before we do that, Dr. Karen, what is one thing that we can do today besides read your book, buy and read your book, to become better self-advocates for our gynecologic health?
So, one thing in terms of just like, with your doctor, if you are having a situation where the doctor's like just not giving you answers, you can just push back a little bit. What do you think is going on? What are my options? If you don't have options for me, who can I see? Help me find someone. It should never be that you see a doctor and that's just it. Like I hear this a lot. You're like, they just said there's nothing wrong, just go home. You always demand a next step. There's always a next step to be taken, whether it's a workup, whether it's a treatment option, whether it's, like seeing a specialist who can help you. So if the doctor cannot give you any of those things, that's where you get your second opinions, your opinions. You can crowdsource experiences where, like endometriosis doctors, menopause doctors, et cetera, you can find out from other people, who's good at this. And this is where social media is really helpful to, find other experts. And then the other thing, just in general, just to kind of like leave people with, I tell people, you have a sphere of influence. I like to, sometimes it's a very depressing talk, just like we were like, oh, it's horrible. But it's really powerful, just in that same theme of like sharing our stories and speaking out is really powerful and it will change things. You have some sort of sphere of influence, whether it's in your family, your community, your workplace, like if you do social media, if you're a librarian, that you can influence someone just by talking about things, about, having these conversations. Like if you have a book club, I want nothing more than people to be like, let's talk about gynecology stuff in my book club. And then, like again, normalizing these conversations. I've had a lot of people say that in their workplace, they start to have like these like, women's like monthly like lunch and learns where they're like every month, like, let's just do something. It doesn't have to be like about health. It could be about, like networking, professional development, whatever, but even include things like, let's learn about menopause, like let's learn about like fertility, like something. Just to, again, like make it so it's not like this like unspoken thing, but this is an important part of our existence as humans, and we should know about this. So in my event at Harvard Bookstore, a lot of the people in the audience were teachers, and they all came up and were like, we're gonna work on a sex ed curriculum, we're gonna like get books into the library, with information that's age appropriate, that, we can give kids resources for. So again, it's like somewhere you have the ability to make a difference in your sphere. So, and then I think that's the exciting thing is to, wherever I go, I'm like, I don't know what you guys do, but you're going to do something great. And that's the positive thing. So like this, it's not being like, oh, everything's horrible. We're going to change it.
Yeah.
So we're going to make a difference. We're going to change
Yeah.
it. So.
And I think you mentioned that here. You want to start a movement in your book.
Yeah. I want this to start a movement. It's not just about like, here's a book and you learn some stuff. It's like, let's change all this. So,
well, thank you so much. I could ask you so many more
we could
questions,
go on for, like,
but I want to
4 hours.
open it up to the audience because I'm sure that's why many of them showed up here today. We do have people running mics, so if you can just wait for a mic to get to you, that would be great.
Because they are recording it and it'll be on YouTube, so if you have friends who couldn't come, the video will live there.
Questions? No. Oh.
Yeah. I love your outfit too, by the way.
Yes.
I totally wore this for your book. I just have to say, I wanted to start off by thanking you. I've been a healthcare provider for 28 years now, 26 teaching reproductive health, both in the military and for inner city kids. This will never get old. If you have kids, just wait till they get older because my oldest has had a baby. The need will never go away. And you're one of my favorite approachable resources to empower people. And I'll be honest, to have somebody other than white. Let's be real about what's out there for people right now. So thank you so much. And I was just going to check in with you on what are your next steps, and does that include advocacy, as we are literally fighting for medications to be available since they get labeled as like Plan B, but we use them as a pre-op for colposcopies, which has to do with every single person having female parts.
Yeah, exactly. So I have been ramping up kind of like some of the, not political messaging, but the reproductive rights messaging. So I just started working with Katie Couric Media. Like they basically will take kind of content that I've made and like kind of, blast it out to their followers. And so I wrote a whole piece on the reproductive rights stakes in the election, about, not just abortion, which is obviously important, but also IVF, the affiliate things like the Mise Impossible, which even though it's for many things besides, abortion, it's being impacted methotrexate. And then the fact that there are like maternity deserts because healthcare providers are leaving. So just trying to like kind of make that, clear to everybody. And also just trying to rally the vote. Obviously, you guys know, just whatever you can do to kind of get people out and voting and understanding all this stuff. And I have a couple more like kind of just, book tour events and things coming up. But basically, I thought you were going to ask like what the next book is. So there's no next book yet, but my current little seed of the thought is a book on sex. So like I love history, so it's going to be like chapters on birth control and like monogamy or like whatever, and then have each of those things like in history, like ancient Rome, Roman Empire, and then what it is currently. So just kind of like showing the through line from the past to the present. So, but anyway, who knows? We'll hopefully. Thank you. Thank you very much. While we're waiting for the past, I had a recent event, like just at a local library, and because it was a smaller group, like everyone spoke. It was absolutely amazing. So it was like literally like everybody in the room got a chance.
I
to
love
share
that, like a
story.
round
This is
table.
like the best ever. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I haven't read the book yet, but you said that it's really for teens and older, adolescents and older. And so beyond parents, so I'm a parent of 2 young kids, 8 years old and 4 years old. They're both little girls. What are some recommendations for how we can pull lessons from the book and start conversations with them? And what are some recommendations for books that we could read with them? Yeah, particularly 8 for maybe a little young beyond like micro conversations, but
Exactly. So there's a couple of recommendations for really young kids. So a friend of mine, Allison Rogers from social media, she's a fertility doctor. She wrote a book, and of course I'm going to get the name wrong, but it's like we need to talk about vaginas. It's like that's literally the name, I think. And so it's very like visual. It's like very colorful, but it's about bodies, like what are the body parts, what's a period, sex. So again, just like normalizing these conversations so that it's like not shameful. It's just like learning like your nose, your lungs, your heart. And for a little bit of an older audience, like Jenny Lincoln, a lot of you probably know Jennifer Lincoln. So it's we need to talk about down there. The names are very similar, but it's more for like maybe like a high school, like college. So it's about like like sex, tampons, discharge. Like consent, like all of these things. So it's sort of like you pick like kind of these age appropriate like ways to talk about your body, bodily function, sex, being a sexual person. And it's all about, like a non-judgmental, neutral way. Again, just as if you're teaching them like how does your stomach work? How does your GI system work? What does it mean to get a cold? Like, this is health. And to make it so that they feel comfortable discussing with you, like having that openness so that they, if they have questions as they get older, will feel comfortable coming with you and knowing that they're not going to, it's not like they're not going to be afraid, they're not going to be judged, and that's so important. And like I said, my book is more for probably like a high school age. So there's also like the care and keeping of you, like that's classic. I actually did a podcast with Cara Neverson, who's one of the authors of the Care and Keeping of You, I think part 2 or something. So yeah, like I think it's like American Girl series. That's a classic. I think a lot of people go to that one for really young girls. So I wish there's not like really a good one for boys. I wish there was. Somebody wrote a book for boys. But
Let me know when there is one.
And a side note before we go on, I want this to be for everybody. This is not like a woman's book. Like this is an everybody book. It's about like how pregnancy happens, like reproductive health, abortion, like birth control. Like these are universal things. Like sexual health, it's for everyone. It's important for men to understand women's bodies as well.
Yeah.
I hijacked the mic because I knew I had something to piggyback on her question. So I have a daughter who is 9, and I personally started my period very young, like at 11, and she is even further developed than I am. And I'm curious, like, if you speak to like how periods are starting earlier and earlier, and like I've now read there are impacts like with things later in life that could be harmful, and just you also feel guilty when it's your child that you're like, because my mom was like, it's all the chicken, the hormones you're eating. But I'm like, we eat pretty organic. Like I've been doing my best, and she's still developing really young. So just curious, like if you can speak to that, or, if there's thoughts on it.
It does seem like, like compared with like hundreds of years ago, like people are kind of going through like puberty earlier and having periods a little bit earlier. It tends to be also like Hispanic and Black girls are having kind of earlier periods. And so whether that is, because of, our nutritional patterns or things like that too, like sometimes like the later development was also a sign of like malnutrition, like that it took longer for things to kind of develop. Now, there are some risks with earlier kind of menarche and stuff like that in terms of cancer risk, but I always tell people it's not like a major risk. It's not like, because for whatever reason your daughter went through, had her period a little bit younger, that like now she's like doomed. It's not like that. So just to kind of put your mind at ease, it's not something that you have to like worry about her the rest of her life because of that. And with the whole like risk factors and causing and everything, I tell people you didn't like cause it. Like you said, it's not that you didn't eat organic enough or anything like that. There's a lot in the book about like nutrition, about lifestyle, and like some of the risks, fibroids and vitamin D deficiency and like fruit intake. It's not that you caused it. So I make sure to say that a lot in the book when I talk about risk factors. It's not that if you didn't do the right thing, you caused it. It's just that these are things to be aware of, that there's like associations. So just to be aware. So, empower yourself with associations. Don't put undue pressure on yourself because you're like, oh God, if I don't do the right things, eat the right stuff, do the right exercise, I'm gonna like, doom my health and my children. So, kind of just like turning it around so, like you understand, like there are some associations, be aware, but not like, oh God, we messed it up or something. But you're a good mom for, asking these questions. There's gotta be other people.
I know.
Yeah, no. Let's go.
Thank you for raising the issue about how research doesn't even look at women. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the intersectionality of perimenopause or hormone fluctuation and non-predominant neurotypes. Non-predominant neurotypes like ADHD and autism, and the impact of that on women's ability to mask or function, frankly.
Yeah, it's a good question. Not that I have great like data on it, because like you said, there's barely any research on just basic menopause. I hate to say it. But I've heard this a lot from people, especially with the symptoms of things like focus and brain fog. So I have a lot of patients with ADHD who, they say that their baseline kind of issues of focus get really thrown out of whack when they're going through perimenopause. They also add in like sleep disturbance, like it's, you may wake up a whole bunch of times and then when you're at work, you're like, I really can't focus. So there's definitely it's not, like theoretical, is definitely something to that. Again, I wish I had better like statistics and things, but it is something I've heard from patients. I've heard stories about, and it is important to factor in that people come into all of these experiences with a particular background, and they're already kind of going through certain things, and then sometimes it's just exacerbating it even on top of what the average person's going through too. So it's a good question, yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Minority Moms, for highlighting this event. It's actually very timely because I'm in the process of being diagnosed with an endometriosis right now. And so this is obviously, it affects everyone, all of humanity, but it was really frustrating to learn that there's not much research. I knew about it, but also actually not much research at all. And the range that's given that is like, oh, it affects something like 10% to 90% women, right? So I'm like, okay. So have you found effective ways to talk to men about this and for them to join this conversation? Because obviously we have majority women here right now. And so how do we talk to them? And have you found a good way?
Yeah. So a couple of different points you brought up. The one is how many people are affected by endo. I will say after Roe v. Wade fell and I was doing a ton of sterilizations, like tubal ligations, I found endo in most of those patients. I was getting like 30 to 50 calls a day about sterilizations because I was on a list of doctors who would do them for child-free people coming over. I started putting laparoscopic bilateral self-injectomy and excision endometriosis on the consent form. So I was finding it in almost everyone. And the story was always, I had horrible periods when I was a teenager. I got put on birth control. I stayed on it, got better. And then we have surgery and we find it. We can't diagnose it without surgery. So if people don't get the surgery, they never know. So the 10% is at least 10%, if not more. So in terms of the communication, I think, with men, I will say a lot of my most loyal followers are gay men, and they are amazing. They share the shit out of my content. They're like, yes, Dr. Tang. So I think because too, there is that intersectionality of people who feel like they are marginalized, they are supporting, people who women who are struggling. We're all together in the struggle. And like I said, just making it so it's like not just a woman thing. Like,
Yeah.
this is a rights thing. And so I've seen this, and it's beautifully explained by men who support reproductive rights and abortion rights. It's not just like a woman who is pregnant thing. It's like this is all of us as a humanity and like a justice issue. So for like the endometriosis to say like, you know, if you, everyone, like there's so many people with endo, like someone knows someone who has it. Like they are, you know, throwing up, they're missing work, they're going through fertility issues, they're having diarrhea, like it's horrible. And that like every man must know a friend, a relative, a spouse, you know, whoever, and it's important for them to also support this. So just again, normalizing it as a health issue, it's not just like a lady problem, it's a health issue. So just like we talk freely about cancer, about strokes, heart attacks, my husband had a pinched nerve. And he could speak so freely about it to his boss, his colleagues, like, you know, I hurt my hip, I pinched my nerve, I'm only for physical therapy, I gotta go to the doctor. You know, for women, you're like, oh my God, like I can't talk about my painful periods and my diarrhea, like that suggests endometriosis because of like, oh, but you should be able to. You should be able to, like, I'm having horrible symptoms, like this is what's causing it, and this is why we need to, you know, fight for better data about the other treatment options, et cetera. So, you know, it is something that like men should be part. That's why I say every time I hear, oh, like women should read this book, I'm like, no, like everybody should read this book. It's like everyone should know.
Mhm.
This is, yeah.
So I have a little bit of a personal story, and for the sake of all the women here, that's why I'm asking. I basically had a situation where I had an ovarian cyst that had been there for 3 years and was growing, and nobody told me about it. So every time I went to the OBGYN, it was there, and I had a chronic disease, and it was showing up in all the like the CT scans, and it was noted in my charts. I found out later. And because I have a chronic disease, I apparently have a very high pain threshold. So I didn't know it was there until it was the size of a grapefruit and intorsion. And to put icing on the cake, I was sent home because their OBGYN wasn't available at the hospital until the following Monday. Over the weekend. So my husband said no and drove me all the way from Bremerton to Seattle to get help. So for the sake of all the women here, how do we advocate for ourselves in that situation?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll tell you what should have happened is if they didn't have no GYN, they should have transferred you. Like, that's a surgical emergency. Like, you don't just say, like, oh, like, just go home and let your ovary die. Like, it really is like your husband did the right thing, which was, like, they needed to get you to some place where you could get the care you needed. So, you know, like the situation with the office where I was saying that, like, you have to push them a little bit, like, what's your next step? Like, what are you planning to do? Like, the answer can't be do nothing. So you can kind of like push back a little bit just to say, like, you know, what do you think is going on? Like, what do we do about this? And if you can't give me an answer or a treatment, like, we need to arrange for a place or like a level of care, a different, you know, surgeon or whoever to take care of it. So, you know, that is something like legally, like they, like, you know, should be handling. So if they don't have a gynecologist, just like as if, you know, like somebody had like an eyeball emergency, well, they can't just be like, well, good luck. Like, you know, we have nobody to help you. Like, they should be arranging for you to get emergency eyeball care. Like, so again, don't let them treat women's health as lesser than like a heart attack, a gunshot wound. Same thing, like imagine like a gunshot wound. Like, you used to be like, well, we have no trauma surgeon. Get you to some place where has a trauma surgeon, you know? So yeah, so if you're having any sort of extreme situation, and that's obviously a medical emergency. So if you're having severe pain, you know, like you're hemorrhaging, like something like that, they need to urgently treat you. So yeah, like it is tough because, you know, like you don't want to be like questioning, but obviously the stakes are so high, you have to, and if they're not listening, they need to be pushed. So.
And in like a lead up to that, how do you advocate if you don't know to advocate? Like, I had no idea it was there. For the
Yeah,
3 years
and
leading
it's
up
tough
to it.
because we don't want you to be like your own gynecologist. We're like, I think this is this. I need this treatment. Like, there are also like patient advocates. If you're just like, I'm in pain, I'm bleeding, or whatever symptom you're going through, and you're not getting answers, it doesn't have to be that you have to be like, I think I have ovarian torsion. I need an emergency laparoscopy. But you can call upon those patient advocates to say, like, this is not, I'm not getting a resolution to what's going on. Somebody needs to advocate for me, and like there are like every institution has something like that. So obviously, in an office situation, like you can walk, you can go to a second opinion. In an emergency situation, like you have to like work with the system that's there. But.
One thing I always do is I always fill out the Press Ganey survey.
Oh,
Because I'm like, people read that. It was my job to read it when I was working at a hospital system. And oftentimes we would forward really, escalate serious ones to our patient advocacy team. Yeah.
We have time for 2 more.
I was about to say that.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I work with teenagers, and I'm a sex therapist, so I work with a lot of people who are dealing with these issues. And I feel like there's a lot of things that happen after the fact, and then they don't know what to do about it, right? They found it later, and then there's all this evidence that the doctor should have done something different. And so I'm wondering what you think how legal repercussions or lawsuits might play into changing hospitals' priority of women's health. Or even for, again, like teenagers who have no idea what's supposed to be happening to their bodies. Like IUDs, for example, is something I hear all the time from teenagers I work with. They're like, it was so painful, but I didn't know I could stop it. And also, can you ask for pain meds? So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so, first of all, the reason I wrote the book was for this, because I said at the very beginning, like, nobody knows this. They don't come out of the room knowing anything. And so, just having information in a way that is accessible is so important, just to kind of have that little bit of a baseline to be able to kind of be existing in a healthcare system, as somebody who needs help. So, like I said, there's a whole chapter on IUDs and pain and like birth control options, like, why would you pick one or the other? Like, what's the experience of going for a Pap smear? How can you make it less uncomfortable? And then in terms of the legal thing, so again, it's more than we can cover right now. But unfortunately, legal stuff has to be evidence of harm. So it can't just be like that somebody was like treated poorly, or that they, it had to be that there was some sort of like a harm proven because the person didn't like do the standard of care. So unfortunately, that becomes like a whole very specific thing. But I think just in terms of probably like more effective to, again, like kind of walk and vote with your feet, basically, to to find a place that is good, to to crowdsource and to say like these are providers who have treated patients well, who are really experienced and really knowledgeable, who share that. But ultimately that's more kind of constructive too. So like getting people to the people who are really good, rather than like maybe the doctor was just not very good at it, and just like demonizing them. I don't know, but there are some times where you do need to like escalate and say like this is something that needs to be held accountable, and that's where you have like your legal ramifications. But also, like I said, most important for people is just to kind of get the care that you need, and kind of just putting all the resources to that, because that takes so much energy just as it is, just like finding a good doctor. So.
Any last questions? Okay, great.
So Karen, I know we had a lot of time to talk before, but I just feel like, and I'm only half kidding, I feel like you should like start like a political movement for like funding women's health research, because I feel like there's so much unknown, and I feel like a lot of the questions are directed towards like, why isn't there more answers? Like, how could we get more answers, right? And obviously a part of that is like political, right? Like making it a political issue, voting for, candidates who support that issue. But I'm also wondering like, if there's other venues where, women like who care about this, feel passionate about it, that we could contribute in some way. Like I know like for long COVID, like now there's these like patient-centered research foundations where people are like essentially donating their own money to help direct research into things like long COVID that have gotten varied levels of research support, right? And so like I feel like women's health is like a little bit akin to that in the sense like it's not always forefront in the minds of like research.
And that's
right.
That's a great question. I wish I had an amazing answer for it. Like I know, like I said, the advocacy groups have been very good about, like for PCOS, endometriosis especially. I think those are the two that come to mind. Infertility as well. Just kind of raising awareness, like fundraising again, going to like local state government and asking for funding. Connecticut has an amazing like endometriosis group that came, about because of advocacy, and it became a combination of the academic researchers, like basic science researchers, and the local state government. That they were like, everyone's involved in this, we all have a stake. And so, obviously that's like sort of an ideal situation, but it obviously takes energy and takes somebody to kind of spearhead it. So a lot of times it comes down to the advocates who are like, I am so angry and frustrated, I'm going to do something, and they kind of take that leadership. It's tough because like obviously there's only so many hours in the day for one person, but like again, if this is something that is important to some of you, like one of you in the room may lead something like that, and I think that's really exciting. So we do need that, obviously. And, if I had enough time, it's good. Yay!
Thank you.
Quick, like, we obviously have to get their social media. Can I do like a little video of everybody? Just kind of like, like we're all here. Jonathan Van Ness does this at his shows.
And he's a buddy of yours now,
Yes,
right?
Yeah. Not to be like, oh, my friend Jonathan Van Ness, but like,
Love it.
Alright, so we're gonna do like almost like the wave. I'll be like, go ahead. And starting with Jane's husband. Are you ready? Awesome.
Love it.
I love it. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. I'm just so appreciative and so grateful for you writing the book. And thank you so much, Jane, for doing such a great job interviewing tonight. It's really, really fantastic. Just a reminder for folks that Dr. Tang's books are available for sale over at the Elliott Bay Book Company table. Yay. Thank you, John. And then Dr. Tang will be signing at that white table. So if you have the book or get a book, you can line up at the table and Karen will sign your books. I also wanted to mention, as you're heading out into the evening, you know the library is closed, so we'll invite you to leave through either the elevators that are in the lobby or through the 4th Avenue doors. So the rest of the building is closed. Now I'm going to just temporarily hand the mic over to the fabulous Susan Liu from Model Minority Moms podcast to tell you something.
All right, so much of tonight was like, we don't need to whisper anymore, right? We need to normalize what is going on in our existence. We should not be ashamed about it. And the more conversations we have about it, the more we realize we're not alone and we can affirm our experiences. And so one of the co-sponsors of tonight's event is the podcast Model Minority Moms. We are 3 Seattle moms, and we talk about these things that we're tired of whispering about what's going on in our relationships, about motherhood, about downshifting in our careers, about mental health, about mom rage, about it all. And so if you want to have more of a taste and more of a community around these experiences, please subscribe to our podcast. And if you're like, wait, no, but Susan, it's like a night out tonight, then you can have a follow-up conversation with these two. We are going to the W Hotel, the lobby bar. Go in and say, I'm here with the vagina party. And then they'll be like, oh, and then they'll take you to the back, and then we'll have a table there because one of our amazing husbands is going to reserve a table. But if you just want to continue this night because you guys, I got a babysitter, or like it's my night out, you can do that.
Yes.
Let's be in community and let's stop whispering. Thanks.
Woo!
Thank you. Thanks so much to the Model Minority Moms podcast, to Elliott Bay Book Company, and our sponsors, the Seattle Public Library Foundation, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation, and the Seattle Times. And of course, most importantly, thanks to all of you for being here. It's been really wonderful to be in community with you, and thank you for sharing your stories, and we will see you next time. Good night.